"Throw this vagrant and his beast into the luggage compartment," the billionaire screamed. Inside the luxurious first-class train cabin, wealthy passengers sneered at the quiet man in the faded jacket and his loyal German shepherd. They demanded the Navy SEAL be thrown out like trash. But before security could lay a hand on them, the high-speed train violently slammed its brakes, plunging the cabin into pitch-black darkness. Heavily armed mercenaries stormed the car, and the arrogant billionaire crawled under his seat in sheer terror. In a matter of seconds, the soldier and the dog they had just humiliated became their absolute only hope for survival. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments which country you are watching from. And if you love stories that melt your heart, please subscribe to support our channel. The Apex Continental was not a normal train. It was a high-speed fortress of luxury traveling at 200 miles per hour across the country. The first-class cabin resembled the lobby of a five-star hotel. Thick velvet curtains framed the reinforced windows. The carpets were deep and absorbed all sound. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers. Passengers drank expensive champagne from crystal flutes and discussed global markets in hushed tones. The automatic glass doors hissed open. The delicate atmosphere in the cabin changed instantly. Hudson walked through the threshold. He was a Navy SEAL currently on active duty. He stood 6 feet 2 inches tall with broad shoulders and a lean, muscular frame built for survival. He wore a faded olive canvas jacket, dark denim jeans, and scuffed tactical boots. His face was weathered from the sun, his jaw was tight, and his eyes constantly scanned the room for exits and threats. He held a thick leather leash in his left hand. The leash connected to Rex. Rex was a purebred German shepherd. He had a thick coat of black and tan fur, powerful legs, and alert, pointed ears. Rex walked with absolute military precision. His shoulders moved smoothly. His eyes remained locked straight ahead. He did not sniff the plush velvet seats. He did not look at the wealthy passengers. He stayed glued to Hudson's left leg. Their heavy boots and clicking paws disrupted the quiet elegance of the cabin. Murmurs started at the front rows and rolled toward the back. Wealthy businessmen lowered their digital tablets and frowned. Women in designer silk dresses leaned away from the aisle, pulling their expensive bags closer to their chests. Hudson ignored the stares. A soldier learns early to tune out civilian noise. He found seat 4B. He stopped and pointed to the floor beneath his small dining table. "Down," Hudson commanded quietly. Rex immediately turned, circled once, and lay down on the carpet. The dog tucked his front paws inward and rested his chin on them. He became a silent shadow under the table. He did not pant. He simply watched the aisle. Hudson sat down, stretched his long legs, and looked out the window at the blurred landscape. 2 rows ahead sat Sterling. Sterling was a billionaire real estate developer and a man who demanded perfection in his environment. He was 55 years old. He had slicked back silver hair, a sharp nose, and wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit. Sterling turned in his seat and glared at Hudson. Sterling's face twisted with pure disgust. He slapped his hand against his leather armrest. He spoke loudly to ensure the entire cabin heard him. "This is an absolute outrage," Sterling announced. "I pay a premium price to travel in peace. I pay to avoid dealing with the lower class. And now the staff allows vagrants and wild animals inside the VIP section." A woman dripping in diamonds across the aisle nodded quickly. She clutched her pearl necklace. "It really is a health hazard. The smell alone is going to ruin the entire trip. These people have no respect for boundaries." Hudson heard every word. He did not react. He slowly opened a plastic water bottle, took a drink, and capped it tightly. Sterling stood up. He marched down the aisle and stopped directly beside Hudson. Sterling looked down his nose at the soldier. "You are in the wrong car," Sterling said. His voice dripped with poison. "Take your mutt and move to the economy section, or better yet, get off at the next stop. You do not belong here." Hudson turned his head slowly. He looked Sterling directly in the eyes. Hudson possessed a cold, deadpan stare forged in active combat zones. "I paid for this seat," Hudson said. His voice was low and completely steady. "The dog stays with me. Go sit down." Sterling turned red with rage. He was not used to being dismissed. He pulled a silver phone from his pocket and pressed a button connecting to the train staff. "Security," Sterling barked into the device. "Get to the first-class VIP car right now. We have a trespasser refusing to leave." The heavy doors slid open less than a minute later. Captain Miller entered the cabin. Miller was the chief of train security. He was a heavily built man with a thick red neck, wearing a tight black uniform and carrying a solid wooden baton on his belt. Miller spotted Sterling and rushed over, eager to please the billionaire. "What is the problem, Mr. Sterling?" Miller asked breathlessly. Sterling pointed a shaking finger at Hudson. "Remove this man. Throw him and his beast into the luggage compartment. They are contaminating the area." Miller turned to Hudson. He unclipped his baton and slapped it against his open palm. He wanted to look intimidating in front of the wealthy guests. "Listen to me, tough guy," Miller said. "You're causing a major disturbance. Grab the dog. You're moving to the back of the train right now." Hudson looked at Miller. He evaluated the guard's stance instantly. Miller had bad balance. He held the baton too loosely. Hudson knew he could disarm the man and break his arm in less than 3 seconds, but Hudson remained completely still. "Check my ticket," Hudson replied. "He is a registered military service animal. You touch him, you break federal law." Miller scoffed loudly. He stepped closer and raised the baton. "I am the law on this train. Get up before I drag you up." Rex sensed the escalating threat. The German shepherd did not bark. Instead, he let out a deep, vibrating growl from deep within his chest. He bared his white teeth. Sterling jumped back, terrified. "The animal is aggressive," Sterling screamed. "Hit him, Miller. Break its skull." Miller gripped the baton with both hands and raised it high above his head. He aimed a heavy downward strike directly at the table covering Rex. Hudson moved. His muscles coiled like a steel spring. He shifted his weight, preparing to block the strike, disarm Miller, and end the confrontation. Before Miller could swing, the world exploded into chaos. A deafening metallic screech shattered the air. The sound was like 1,000 knives scraping against solid steel. The high-speed train slammed its emergency brakes. The deceleration was violent and instantaneous. The laws of physics took over the cabin. Sterling was thrown forward like a ragdoll. He smashed face first into a passenger seat and crumpled to the floor, bleeding from his nose. Miller lost his footing entirely. The heavy guard flew backward, slammed hard against the automatic glass doors, and collapsed unconscious. Crystal champagne glasses shattered against the walls. Laptops flew through the air like dangerous projectiles. People screamed in pure terror as they were violently jolted against their seatbelts. Hudson reacted with pure instinct. He threw his body forward, wrapping his strong arms over Rex to pin the dog securely to the floor, protecting him from flying luggage and broken glass. The train shook violently. Metal groaned and shrieked, fighting a desperate battle to stay on the tracks. Sparks flew outside the windows, illuminating the dark tunnels. Then, the violent shaking stopped. The train ground to a dead, unnatural halt. The soft jazz music died completely. The bright ceiling lights flickered wildly, casting terrifying, chaotic shadows across the panicked passengers. A second later, the lights completely shut off. The luxury cabin plunged into absolute suffocating darkness. The smell of burned ozone and scorched metal filled the air. Hudson slowly lifted his head. He kept one hand firmly on Rex. In the pitch black, his SEAL training took over. Trains did not stop like this by accident. Someone had pulled the emergency brake. Someone wanted them trapped. The real nightmare was just beginning. The pitch-black cabin filled with the sounds of hyperventilating passengers and whimpering cries. The emergency lights flickered to life, casting a sickly yellow glow over the first-class car. Hudson stayed low to the floor. He kept his hand flat against Rex. The dog remained perfectly still, sensing the extreme tension radiating from his handler. Hudson checked his surroundings with sharp, calculating eyes. The glass from broken champagne flutes littered the expensive carpet like jagged diamonds. People were slowly sitting up, rubbing their bruised heads and groaning in pain as the shock of the sudden stop wore off. Sterling was a pathetic sight. The billionaire was crawling on his bare hands and knees, clutching his bleeding nose, smearing dark red blood across his custom charcoal suit. Captain Miller, the heavy security guard who had threatened Hudson moments ago, remained completely unconscious against the jammed automatic doors. Hudson knew this was not a mechanical failure. His combat instincts screamed that a coordinated attack was underway. He slowly reached down and unclipped the heavy leather leash from Rex's collar. A leash was a deadly liability in a firefight. He needed the highly trained dog to move freely. The heavy steel doors at the front of the cabin suddenly blew open with a violent, concussive explosion. Thick gray smoke poured into the room, choking the air. Powerful tactical flashlights sliced through the yellow gloom, blinding the panicked passengers. Heavy combat boots stomped aggressively onto the carpet. 6 men entered the cabin in perfect tactical formation. They wore full black body armor, tactical helmets, and night vision goggles pushed up on their foreheads. They carried suppressed assault rifles and moved with the lethal, synchronized precision of professional killers. At the center of the formation stood Cale. Cale was the ruthless leader of the mercenary strike team. He was a tall, heavily muscled man with a jagged white scar running down his sharp jawline. His eyes were cold, calculating, and devoid of any human empathy. He did not carry himself like a common thug. He moved like a seasoned military veteran who had sold his soul to the highest bidder. Kyle raised a heavy electronic megaphone to his mouth. "Nobody moves," Kyle announced. His voice was calm, mechanical, and completely terrifying. "Keep your hands where I can see them. Do not attempt to stand. Do not attempt to speak." The wealthy passengers completely lost their minds. The sudden appearance of heavily armed terrorists shattered their fragile, protected reality. The woman with the heavy diamond necklace began to scream hysterically, throwing her hands over her face and sobbing uncontrollably into her palms. A wealthy businessman in a tailored suit jumped up from his seat, waving his hands in a frantic panic, begging the armed men not to hurt him because he had endless amounts of money. One of the mercenaries simply stepped forward, pivoted his hips, and slammed the solid stock of his rifle directly into the businessman's stomach. The man collapsed to the floor instantly, violently gasping for air as he curled into a fetal position. The brutal message was instantly clear to everyone in the room. Wealth and status meant absolutely nothing here. Pure fear washed over the cabin like a freezing wave. The immense arrogance that had filled the luxurious room just 10 minutes ago completely vanished. Sterling, the powerful man who had loudly demanded Hudson be thrown out like trash, was now shaking uncontrollably. The billionaire slithered backward like a frightened worm and shoved his entire body underneath a row of passenger seats. He curled into a tight ball, pressing his bleeding face against the dirty carpet, praying the armed men would not notice his pathetic, shivering existence. Hudson watched the mercenaries carefully from his low position on the floor. He systematically analyzed their weapons, their spacing, and their heavy tactical gear. They were highly trained professionals. They kept their index fingers strictly off their triggers, showing excellent fire discipline. Fighting 6 heavily armored men in a confined, brightly lit space filled with unpredictable, panicking civilians was a guaranteed suicide mission. Hudson needed a better tactical advantage. He needed the absolute element of surprise. Kyle lowered his megaphone, unslung his assault rifle, and pointed the black barrel directly at the ornate ceiling. He squeezed the trigger without hesitation. 3 deafening gunshots erupted inside the enclosed cabin. The explosive noise was physically painful, echoing off the reinforced windows. The gunfire instantly silenced the screaming passengers, replacing their cries with muted, terrified whimpers. Dust and structural debris rained down from the jagged bullet holes in the roof. "The next shots go into a skull," Kyle stated coldly, sweeping his gaze across the terrified crowd. "Every person in this car will immediately place their mobile phones, tablets, and smartwatches on the seats next to them. If my men find a hidden device on your body, you will die immediately. Begin." The mercenaries spread out systematically. They moved slowly down the 2 narrow aisles, dragging heavy black canvas bags, aggressively collecting every single piece of electronic communication. Hudson knew his tight window of opportunity was closing rapidly. The mercenaries were moving dangerously close to row 4. He looked down at Rex. He locked eyes with the highly trained German shepherd. Hudson raised his right hand and formed a flat palm, pushing it downward in a slow, deliberate, flowing motion. It was the silent tactical command for absolute stealth and evasion. Rex understood the military order instantly. The large dog lowered his muscular body until his belly almost touched the thick carpet. Hudson slowly slid backward on his elbows and knees, using the thick velvet passenger seats as physical cover. The flickering yellow emergency lights created deep, shifting pockets of shadows near the floorboards. Hudson and Rex seamlessly merged into those dark shadows. They moved with absolute, terrifying silence, sliding smoothly past the terrified passengers who were too busy emptying their pockets with trembling hands to notice the elite soldier and the war dog retreating. They reached the very back of the cabin. The manual emergency door leading to the luggage compartment was slightly ajar due to the violent impact of the sudden stop. A heavily armored mercenary with a bright flashlight slowly approached row 4. He shined his intense white beam directly on the empty seats where Hudson and Rex had been sitting just seconds ago. The mercenary kicked the empty plastic water bottle on the floor and actively scanned the immediate area, his finger resting dangerously close to his rifle trigger. He clearly noticed the fresh pool of blood from Sterling's nose, but his flashlight beam missed the billionaire hiding directly underneath the adjacent seats. Hudson placed his large, calloused hand flat against the heavy metal door of the luggage car. He pushed it open just enough to slide his broad, muscular shoulders through the narrow gap. He snapped his fingers exactly once, producing a sharp sound barely louder than a single dripping drop of water. Rex darted forward like a fleeting grey ghost, slipping smoothly through the crack in the door without making a single audible sound. Hudson followed his partner immediately, pulling the heavy metal door shut behind them until its locking mechanism clicked softly into place. The luggage car was pitch black, freezing cold, and stacked high with metal trunks and expensive suitcases. Hudson knelt in the complete darkness and rested his heavy hand on the German shepherd's head. They were trapped on a moving steel coffin controlled by ruthless killers. But Cale had just made a fatal, unforgivable mistake. He had allowed an active-duty Navy SEAL and a combat-tested war dog to slip freely into the hunting ground. The luggage compartment was a freezing steel box. It smelled of cold metal, expensive leather, and damp winter coats. Hudson knelt securely behind a large aluminum transit case. He breathed slowly. He consciously regulated his heart rate to slow his adrenaline. Rex sat perfectly still beside his right leg. The German shepherd matched his handler's calm breathing rhythm. Hudson ran his large hands over Rex's thick, coarse coat. It was a grounding ritual they had performed before dozens of combat drops. They were completely alone in the dark. The stalled train was an isolated island in the middle of nowhere. No local police could breach this fortress quickly. No military extraction team was coming. Hudson had to become the cavalry. Hudson checked his tactical gear. He wore civilian clothes and possessed absolutely no firearms. He reached into his right pocket and pulled out a heavy folding combat knife. He flicked his wrist. The matte black steel blade locked into place with a dull, heavy click. It was his only weapon against heavily armored men carrying automatic rifles. It had to be enough. He looked down at his dog. He tapped 2 fingers heavily against his own chest. He then pointed his index finger directly at the steel door leading toward the service corridor and the kitchen. This was the silent command to move out. Rex understood the gesture instantly. The dog stood up without making a single sound. The service corridor connecting the cars was extremely narrow and claustrophobic. The flickering emergency lights barely penetrated the heavy gloom. Hudson moved with absolute terrifying silence. He placed each footstep with exact tactical precision. He placed his heel down softly, rolling his weight smoothly to the toe. It was the ghost walk of an elite Navy SEAL taught to approach enemy sentries undetected. Rex mirrored him flawlessly. The dog's padded paws made 0 sound on the hard linoleum floor. They operated as a single, perfectly synchronized hunting unit. They reached the open entrance of the train's commercial kitchen. The kitchen was a long, narrow metallic room. Stainless steel food prep counters reflected the weak, sickly yellow emergency light. Frying pans and heavy soup pots hung from metal racks above the center island. The space smelled strongly of cold grease, spilled coffee, and residual panic from the fleeing cooking staff. Rex stopped abruptly. The large dog stiffened his entire body. The dark hair along his spine stood up rigidly. He looked directly at Hudson and let out a tiny puff of air through his black nose. He pointed his snout deliberately toward the far steel door leading to the next passenger car. Enemies were approaching quickly. Hudson heard them a full 2 seconds later. He heard the heavy, uncoordinated thud of combat boots striking the floorboards. He heard the metallic clink of weapon slings scraping against hard body armor. 2 men were coming. Hudson scanned the metallic kitchen instantly. He needed the high ground immediately. He needed absolute, total silence. A single missed strike or a loud gunshot would bring Kyle and the entire mercenary team rushing down on them. Hudson spotted a thick industrial water pipe running parallel along the ceiling above the main prep counter. He reached up and grabbed the pipe with both hands. He pulled his large, muscular frame upward, using raw upper body strength. He swung his heavy boots up and wedged them tightly against the top edge of the steel cabinets. He became a motionless shadow, hiding near the ceiling. He looked down at Rex waiting below. Hudson gave a sharp, closed fist signal with his right hand. It was the command to attack on his specific mark. Rex slid silently beneath a long stainless steel prep table. The dog vanished completely into the deep shadows near the floorboards. The far door kicked open violently. 2 heavily armed mercenaries walked into the narrow kitchen. The first man was Pike. Pike was tall and dangerously lean, with a jagged tribal tattoo covering the entire left side of his neck. He carried a suppressed submachine gun. The second man was Vance. Vance was incredibly stocky, with a thick beard and nervous, twitchy eyes constantly scanning the corners. Vance held a heavy tactical shotgun at the ready. "Check the walk-in coolers," Pike ordered in a harsh, arrogant whisper. "Kyle wants this entire rear section completely secured before we move the hostages." "Nobody is hiding in here," Vance grumbled in complaint. He shined his bright flashlight recklessly across the empty cooking counters. "Those rich pigs up front are way too scared to run anywhere." They walked deeper into the metallic kitchen. They walked directly into the kill zone. Pike took the lead position. He walked directly underneath the overhead metal pot rack. He walked directly underneath the shadow of Hudson. Vance stayed exactly 3 paces behind his partner. Vance was walking dangerously close to the prep table, where Rex waited in the dark. Hudson timed his breathing perfectly. He waited for Pike to take one more confident step forward. He needed the mercenary's neck completely exposed from the heavy body armor. Pike stepped forward. Hudson dropped from the ceiling. He fell like a massive stone. He did not make a single sound until he hit his human target. Hudson landed squarely on Pike's upper back. The SEAL wrapped his thick, muscular left arm violently around Pike's throat, locking in a devastating blood choke. He drove his heavy right knee hard into Pike's lower spine to break his balance. Pike's mouth opened wide in shock to scream for help. Hudson cranked his powerful arm backward, cutting off the blood flow to the brain instantly. The scream died completely in Pike's throat. Simultaneously, Rex launched his brutal attack. The German Shepherd exploded from beneath the steel prep table like a guided gray missile. Vance heard the heavy scuffle erupting right behind him. He spun around in panic, trying to raise his heavy shotgun to fire. He never got the chance to pull the trigger. Rex leapt high through the air. The massive 80-pound dog slammed into Vance's chest with brutal, bone-jarring force. The heavy impact knocked the air completely out of the stocky mercenary's lungs. Rex opened his powerful jaws and clamped down directly on Vance's right forearm. The dog's sharp teeth sank deep through the tactical fabric, piercing directly into muscle tissue. Vance dropped the shotgun immediately. The heavy weapon clattered loudly against the metal floor. Vance tried to scream in agonizing pain. Rex drove his heavy front paws onto Vance's chest, pinning the man completely flat against the hard floor. The dog shifted his crushing bite, gripping tighter and shaking his head viciously to tear the muscle. The intense blinding pain paralyzed Vance entirely. The mercenary could only let out a weak, pathetic gasp for air. Hudson finished his grim work. Pike went completely limp in his arms after exactly 4 seconds. The SEAL lowered the unconscious body silently to the floor to avoid any heavy thuds. Hudson did not pause to rest. He lunged forward instantly. He crossed the narrow kitchen in 2 massive strides. He reached Vance just as the terrified mercenary managed to draw a small combat knife with his free left hand. Hudson grabbed Vance's left wrist with an iron grip. He twisted the joint violently. A sickening pop echoed softly in the kitchen. Vance dropped the knife. Hudson drove a devastating right hook directly into Vance's jaw. The mercenary's eyes rolled back into his head. He went instantly unconscious. Hudson placed his hand firmly on Rex's head. "Out," Hudson whispered clearly. Rex immediately released his bloody grip on Vance's arm. The dog stepped back respectfully, his chest heaving slightly, his intelligent eyes locked on his handler. He awaited the next tactical order. Hudson stood up straight in the quiet kitchen. He looked down at the 2 neutralized threats on the floor. He had executed the double takedown perfectly. He had secured a massive tactical advantage. Hudson worked quickly. He stripped Pike of his tactical radio. He unclipped the small earpiece and placed it securely inside his own right ear. He listened intently to the chaotic, arrogant chatter of Cale's team up at the front of the train. They had no idea their rear perimeter was completely broken. They had no idea they were now the ones being actively hunted. Hudson picked up Pike's suppressed submachine gun. He checked the heavy magazine. It was completely full. He slapped it back into the weapon. He looked down at his loyal dog. "Good boy," Hudson said softly. They stepped over the unconscious bodies and moved forward to take the train back. The small plastic earpiece inside Hudson's right ear crackled with sharp static. Hudson stood perfectly still in the metallic kitchen. He kept his breathing shallow and slow. He listened intently to the encrypted radio channel. Cale's voice cut through the silence. The mercenary leader sounded incredibly calm. That calmness made him highly dangerous. Kyle pressed his radio button. "Pike, Vance, report your status." The radio channel remained completely silent. Hudson looked down at the 2 unconscious men on the floor. They would not be reporting anything for several hours. Kyle waited exactly 5 seconds before trying again. "Pike, confirm Sector 3 is clear." Only static answered him. Kyle was a professional killer. He did not ask a 3rd time. He knew silence meant failure. He knew someone was fighting back. Kyle immediately changed his tactical approach. His voice echoed through the earpiece again, giving crisp orders to his remaining men. Gage, secure the primary doors. We have a hostile element in the rear cars. Gage was a towering brute of a man holding the main exit. He wore heavy tactical plates and carried a massive light machine gun capable of shredding the train walls. Understood, Gage replied in a deep, gravelly voice. Hudson processed the information instantly. Kyle had 4 men left. They were heavily armed and tightly clustered in the VIP car with the hostages. A direct assault through the narrow train corridor was tactical suicide. Hudson needed to draw them out. He needed to break their defensive formation. Suddenly, the train's public address system clicked on. A sharp, high-pitched feedback whine pierced the air. The speakers located in the ceiling of every car crackled to life. Kyle had commandeered the intercom booth. His cold, mechanical voice echoed through the empty corridors and the terrified passenger cabins. Attention. To the individual currently hiding in the rear sections of this train. You have taken 2 of my men. That was a very foolish mistake. I currently hold over 40 passengers in the first-class cabin. You have exactly 2 minutes to walk through the front doors. Put your hands on your head and surrender your weapons. If you do not appear in 2 minutes, I will execute a passenger. I will continue to execute 1 passenger every 60 seconds until you show your face. The background audio of the PA system transmitted the sheer terror of the hostages. Hudson heard wealthy businessmen sobbing uncontrollably. He heard a woman begging for her life. He even recognized Sterling's pathetic whimpering. The billionaire who had demanded Hudson be thrown off the train was now crying loudly on the floor. Hudson felt absolutely zero pity for Sterling, but he refused to let innocent civilians die. He checked his heavy diver watch. The luminous green hands indicated he had 120 seconds to act. Surrendering was not an option. If he gave himself up, Kale would simply execute him and then kill the hostages anyway to leave no witnesses. Hudson had to change the rules of engagement. He had to blind the enemy. Hudson looked at Rex. The large German shepherd sat patiently, waiting for the next command. "We go dark," Hudson whispered. He used 2 fingers to point toward the ceiling, then made a chopping motion downward. Rex understood the shift in tactics. They were moving from stealth evasion to active sabotage. Hudson remembered the train layout diagram he had noticed while boarding. The primary technical and electrical maintenance room was located exactly halfway between the kitchen and the VIP car. He gripped Pike's captured submachine gun tightly and moved out. They glided down the narrow service corridor. Hudson moved like a hunting panther. He checked every corner before exposing his body. He reached the steel door of the technical room. A heavy digital keypad secured the lock. A red LED light blinked steadily above the handle. Hudson did not have the time or the tools to hack the electronic lock. He pressed the cold steel barrel of the suppressed submachine gun directly against the plastic keypad. He squeezed the trigger twice. 2 muffled coughs echoed in the tight hallway. The metal-piercing rounds shattered the internal locking mechanism completely. Hudson kicked the heavy door open and stepped inside. The technical room was incredibly cramped. It smelled strongly of hot copper, dust, and electrical ozone. Racks of blinking servers and thick bundles of colored wires lined the narrow walls. These systems controlled the train's automated braking, navigation, and emergency lighting. Hudson scanned the complex panels quickly. His eyes locked onto a large gray metal box bolted to the far wall. A bright yellow warning label marked it as the central power distribution hub for the passenger cabins. This box fed the backup generators, keeping the emergency lights active. Cale's voice echoed through the stolen earpiece again. 30 seconds left. Gage, grab the loudmouth in the expensive suit. Drag him to the center aisle, he goes first. Hudson heard Sterling scream in absolute terror over the radio feed. Gage was dragging the billionaire across the floor by his expensive collar. The deadline was expiring. Hudson did not hesitate. He raised the heavy submachine gun and used the solid metal stock as a hammer. He swung it violently against the plastic cover of the power box. The plastic shattered into dozens of sharp pieces. Thick red and black copper cables were exposed beneath the wreckage. Hudson reached into his pocket and pulled out his heavy combat knife. The handle was wrapped in thick, insulated rubber. He grabbed the thickest bundle of main power wires with his left hand. "Hold," Hudson commanded Rex. The dog stayed perfectly still near the doorway. Hudson drove the sharp steel blade directly through the thick copper wires. He sawed through the heavy insulation with brutal force. A massive shower of bright blue sparks erupted from the severed cables. The intense electrical feedback hit the main breakers instantly. A loud, heavy metallic thud echoed throughout the entire train as the main relays tripped violently. The sabotage was completely successful. The sickly yellow emergency lights in the technical room died instantly. The lights in the long service corridor outside vanished. The lights inside the first-class VIP cabin shut down completely. The Apex Continental train plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. The hum of the electrical servers faded into complete silence. The only sound left was the terrified screaming of the passengers trapped in the dark. Hudson stood perfectly still in the blacked-out room. His eyes quickly adjusted to the total absence of light. He could not see his own hand in front of his face. He felt Rex press his warm, solid body against his leg. The mercenaries possessed night vision goggles, but Hudson possessed the ultimate predator of the dark. The high-speed train was no longer a hostage situation. It was a perfect, lightless trap. And Hudson was the monster waiting in the shadows. The darkness inside the Apex Continental was absolute. It was a thick, suffocating blackness. The sudden loss of power completely reversed the tactical situation. In the VIP car, Cale cursed loudly. His cold voice echoed through the stolen earpiece inside Hudson's right ear. "Gage, drop the billionaire. Night vision on. Sweep the connecting cars. Find the breaker box and kill the intruder." Gage dropped Sterling onto the floor. Gage activated his night vision goggles. The world turned a grainy, glowing green for the heavily armored mercenary. But night vision required a small amount of ambient light to amplify properly. Inside the sealed metal tube of the train, the image was highly degraded. Shadows became deep, confusing pits. Distances became difficult to judge. Hudson did not need advanced optical technology. He had trained in deep water combat where light simply did not exist. He relied on supreme spatial awareness, acute hearing, and the highly tuned instincts of his war dog. Rex moved smoothly beside his left leg. The German Shepherd's eyes were perfectly adapted to hunt in low-light conditions. The dog's ears twitched actively, picking up the heavy footsteps of the approaching mercenaries long before Hudson could. Hudson slipped quietly out of the technical room and entered the second passenger car. This specific car was located immediately behind the first-class VIP section. It held the overflow of wealthy travelers who had been locked out when Cale's team originally stormed the front. These passengers were huddled together tightly on the floor between the expensive leather seats. They were completely paralyzed by fear. Hudson moved silently down the narrow central aisle. A faint, passing glow from a distant emergency track signal outside briefly illuminated the dark cabin. The terrified passengers looked up in the dim light. They saw the tall, broad-shouldered man wearing the faded canvas jacket. They saw the massive black and tan dog walking silently by his side. It was the exact same man they had mocked, insulted, and tried to throw away at the beginning of the journey. The wealthy woman who had complained loudly about Rex's smell pressed her shaking hands together in prayer. She looked at Hudson with wide, pleading eyes. She did not say a single word, but her face begged him desperately for salvation. Hudson stopped. He gave her a single, slow nod. He placed a finger flat against his lips, demanding absolute silence from the group. The passengers held their breath immediately. They realized their lives rested entirely in the calloused hands of the soldier they had treated like garbage. Cale had sent 2 men to sweep the dark area: Silas and Thorn. Silas was a scarred military veteran with missing teeth and a cruel, arrogant smile. He walked down the narrow aisle with his rifle raised tightly against his shoulder. His green night vision goggles constantly scanned the empty seats. Silas moved far too confidently. He relied too heavily on his technology. Hudson waited patiently in the small, dark vestibule connecting the 2 train cars. He pressed his back flat against the cold metal wall. Rex waited under a low luggage rack directly across from him. Silas stepped heavily through the sliding door into the vestibule. Silas turned his head to the right to check the corner. Hudson struck violently from the left blind spot. He did not use his captured firearm. He used his bare hands. He grabbed the hot barrel of Silas's rifle and shoved it violently upward toward the ceiling, removing the threat of a gunshot. Simultaneously, Hudson drove his heavy combat boot directly into Silas's kneecap. The bones snapped loudly with a wet crunch. Silas opened his mouth wide to scream in agony. Hudson slammed his open palm hard against the mercenary's throat, crushing his windpipe and cutting off the sound instantly. The SEAL wrapped his strong arm around Silas's head and twisted sharply to break his balance. Silas dropped heavily to the floor, completely unconscious before his body even hit the carpet. The entire brutal takedown lasted exactly 3 seconds. Hudson lowered the heavy body to the floor without making a single sound. He looked at Rex. The dog remained perfectly still. Thorn was the youngest mercenary on Cale's strike team. He was highly trained but lacked actual gritty combat experience. He walked exactly 10 paces behind Silas. He heard the faint scuffle in the dark vestibule ahead. Thorn stopped moving entirely. His heart hammered loudly against his ribs. The darkness felt heavy and incredibly oppressive to him. His low-quality night vision goggles created terrifying ghost images in the dark corners. He started breathing rapidly. The psychological fear was actively shifting sides. The heavily armed hunters were now the hunted prey. Thorn stepped slowly into the second passenger car. He swept his rifle back and forth nervously, jumping at every shadow. He heard a tiny, high-pitched whimper. It came from the very back row of passenger seats. A young mother was hiding there, wrapping her arms tightly around her 5-year-old son. The terrified boy had accidentally let out a small, quiet cry. Thorn panicked completely. His shattered nerves finally broke under the intense pressure. He spun aggressively toward the tiny sound, raised his heavy assault rifle, and pulled the trigger blindly in the dark. The powerful gun roared violently in the confined space. Bright yellow muzzle flashes illuminated the dark cabin like miniature lightning strikes. Bullets ripped through the expensive leather seats, shattering plastic trays and sending sharp debris flying into the air. He was firing his weapon directly at the defenseless mother and her child. Rex did not wait for a tactical command. The German shepherd possessed a fierce, instinctual drive to protect the innocent. Rex launched himself aggressively from the deep shadows. The massive dog flew through the air in a long, powerful arc, placing his own muscular body directly between the flying bullets and the crying child. A sharp yelp pierced the deafening sound of the gunfire. A stray bullet grazed Rex's front left leg. The heavy impact spun the dog entirely around mid-air. Rex crashed hard onto the floorboards, sliding violently against the solid metal base of the passenger seats. The brave dog hit the ground heavily, bleeding freely from a fresh, deep wound along his shoulder. Hudson saw his dog fall in the muzzle flashes. The cold, calculating soldier vanished instantly. A terrifying, primal fury took over his entire body. His eyes turned dark and lethal. He did not care about remaining stealthy anymore. He exploded out of the vestibule like a released missile. Thorn stopped firing abruptly because his heavy weapon ran dry. The young mercenary fumbled clumsily with his spare magazine in the dark. It was a fatal mistake. Hudson crossed the remaining distance in 3 massive strides. He tackled Thorne with the unstoppable force of a speeding truck. The heavy impact lifted the young mercenary completely off his feet and slammed him brutally against the reinforced glass window. The thick glass spiderwebbed instantly under the immense pressure. Hudson did not stop his assault. He grabbed Thorne fiercely by the tactical vest, pulled him forward, and delivered a devastating headbutt directly to the mercenary's face. The expensive night vision goggles shattered into sharp plastic pieces. Thorne's nose broke instantly with a sickening snap. Hudson grabbed Thorne's right arm, twisted it violently behind the mercenary's back, and applied brutal, unforgiving pressure until the shoulder popped loudly out of its socket. Thorne screamed loudly in absolute agony. Hudson drove his heavy knee directly into the man's chest, knocking the air entirely from his lungs, and dropped him like a sack of rocks to the floor. The fight lasted exactly 2 seconds. Thorne lay on the carpet, completely broken and permanently neutralized. Hudson ignored the defeated enemy. He dropped quickly to his knees beside Rex. The cabin was dead silent except for the muffled crying of the young mother, thanking him repeatedly through her tears. Hudson ran his large hands quickly over the dog's injured leg. The hot bullet had ripped through the thick black fur and torn a deep groove in the muscle, but it had missed the bone entirely. It was a clean, manageable graze. Rex looked up at Hudson. The dog was panting heavily. His front leg trembled slightly from the sharp pain. But Rex did not whimper again. He lifted his head and licked Hudson's hand exactly once. It was a silent, unbreakable promise that the dog was still firmly in the fight. Hudson pulled a sterile medical bandage from his tactical pocket and wrapped it tightly around the bleeding leg. He tied it off securely to stop the blood flow. "Good boy," Hudson whispered fiercely. "You hold the line." Hudson stood up slowly in the dark. He picked up Thorne's dropped assault rifle. He checked the chamber smoothly. The fear had officially changed sides. Cale was the only major threat left standing in the VIP car. Hudson racked the heavy bolt of the rifle. It was time to push forward and end the nightmare completely. Hudson tied the final knot on the sterile medical bandage. He patted Rex firmly on the neck. The large German shepherd stood up slowly. He favored his left front leg slightly, but his dark eyes remained sharp and completely focused. The bleeding had stopped. Hudson pointed his index finger down the dark corridor toward the first-class VIP car. He then pointed firmly to the floor and finally pointed up toward the ceiling. It was a complex tactical command. Rex understood it perfectly. The highly trained dog would approach the final target silently along the ground and wait hidden in the deep shadows outside the main doors. Hudson would take the high route. Hudson climbed quietly onto a tall metal luggage rack near the vestibule. He reached up and used the solid hilt of his heavy combat knife to unscrew the metal grate of the train air conditioning system. The vent was incredibly narrow. It was built for air circulation, not for a fully grown Navy SEAL wearing tactical gear. Hudson pushed the heavy grate aside and pulled his broad shoulders into the tight metal shaft. The confined space smelled strongly of thick dust and old machine oil. He crawled forward on his elbows and stomach. He moved mere inches at a time. The thin metal beneath him groaned softly under his heavy weight. He consciously controlled his breathing. He blocked out the cramping pain in his shoulders. He crawled steadily forward until he saw a bright rectangle of light shining through the ventilation slats ahead. He reached the position directly above the first-class VIP cabin. Kyle had apparently activated several high-powered portable tactical lanterns. The bright white light flooded the luxury car, casting harsh, sharp shadows against the velvet walls and expensive leather seats. Hudson peered carefully through the metal slats. The remaining wealthy passengers were completely terrified. They huddled tightly together in the center aisle. They kept their heads down and their trembling hands clasped over their necks. Gage stood near the front exit doors. The massive mercenary held his heavy light machine gun at the ready, watching the hostages like a brutal prison guard. Kyle stood in the very center of the cabin. The ruthless leader looked intensely angry. His encrypted radio remained entirely silent. He knew his men in the rear cars were gone. Kyle walked aggressively toward the front row of seats. He stopped directly in front of Sterling. The billionaire real estate developer was still curled on the floor, pressing his face into the dirty carpet. Kyle raised his assault rifle. He aimed the black steel barrel directly at the back of Sterling's head. Hudson tensed his entire body inside the narrow vent. He gripped his combat knife tightly. Sterling was an arrogant, disgusting man who had insulted Hudson and demanded his dog be thrown away into the cold luggage car. But Sterling was an unarmed civilian. A Navy SEAL did not let civilians die. Hudson shifted his weight. He prepared to kick the metal grate completely open. He prepared to drop directly onto Cale and take the heavy rifle bullet if necessary. He calculated the exact drop angle. He needed exactly 2 seconds to execute the kill strike. Hudson raised his heavy boot to kick the metal. Then, something absolutely bizarre happened. Sterling stopped crying. The pathetic, cowardly whimpering vanished completely. The billionaire did not cower away from the heavy rifle barrel. Instead, Sterling reached up with a remarkably steady hand. He grabbed the hot metal barrel of Cale's weapon and calmly pushed it away from his own face. Hudson froze completely. He watched the unbelievable scene unfold through the narrow slats. He did not blink. Sterling stood up from the floor. His face showed absolutely zero fear. The blood from his earlier nosebleed was already drying on his chin. He casually brushed the heavy dust off the lapels of his expensive charcoal suit. He reached up and straightened his silk tie with perfectly steady fingers. He let out a long, heavy sigh of annoyance. He looked at Kyle with pure, unyielding authority. Kyle did not shoot him. Kyle lowered his assault rifle completely. The ruthless mercenary leader gave a sharp, highly respectful nod to the billionaire. "Your men are taking far too long," Sterling said. His voice was completely different now. It was no longer the voice of a panicked victim. It was the cold, demanding voice of a man completely in charge. "You promised me a clean, efficient operation. The silence from the back of the train indicates you are losing control of the situation." "We hit an unexpected complication," Kyle replied calmly. A highly trained individual slipped through the initial sweep. He took out Pike, Vance, Silas, and Thorne. But it does not change the primary objective. We still hold the cabin. We still control the timeline. Sterling scoffed loudly. He walked past Cale and approached his own original seat. He reached underneath the expensive leather chair and pulled out a heavy, reinforced silver briefcase. He placed the briefcase flat on the dining table. He dialed a complex combination code into the dual locks. The locks clicked open sharply. Sterling lifted the lid. Hudson adjusted his angle to see inside the case. It did not contain money or jewelry. It contained a single, heavy black hard drive. The drive possessed a thick red military classification sticker. "This complication is entirely your fault," Sterling stated coldly. He lifted the heavy hard drive and held it up to the bright tactical lanterns. "This drive contains the complete, unencrypted design schematics for the Department of Defense Next Generation drone targeting system. It took me 3 years to secure the right security clearances and bribe the right defense contractors to get it." Sterling handed the hard drive directly to Cale. The mercenary leader placed it carefully into a waterproof pouch on his tactical vest. "The buyers in Eastern Europe are paying $80 million for this data," Sterling continued. "They demand absolute secrecy. That is exactly why I hired your team, Cale. The theft cannot look like corporate espionage. It must look like a brutal terrorist attack. The authorities need a massive tragedy to distract them." Hudson listened from the dark vent. The cold, brutal truth hit him like a physical blow. The entire train hijacking was completely staged. The violence, the fear, the injured passengers. It was all a theatrical play funded by Sterling. The extraction helicopter is arriving at the designated coordinate in exactly 12 minutes, Kyle said. We will place the explosive charges on the front and rear doors of this cabin. We will take you and the drive out through the roof hatch. And the passengers? Sterling asked. He looked at the terrified people huddled on the floor. He looked at them as if they were simply broken, useless furniture. We detonate the charges as we lift off, Kyle answered mechanically. The explosion will derail the front cars entirely. It will cause a massive fire. There will be absolutely 0 survivors in this section. The authorities will find your burned dental records among the casualties. You will officially die a tragic hero in a terrorist attack, Mr. Sterling. You will be free to enjoy your new wealth abroad. Sterling smiled. It was a cold, evil smile. Perfect. I am very tired of dealing with these lower-class people anyway. Set the charges. Let us leave this garbage behind. Hudson felt a terrifying, icy rage flood his veins. He had fought enemies in war zones across the globe, but he had never witnessed such pure, concentrated evil wearing a tailored suit. Sterling was willingly slaughtering dozens of innocent men, women and children simply to cover his own escape and line his pockets. Hudson looked down through the slats. He saw the heavy explosives resting in Cale's tactical bag. He saw Gage standing near the door. He saw Sterling smiling at the impending massacre. Hudson tightened his grip on his combat knife. He shifted his heavy boots against the thin metal walls of the ventilation shaft. The stealth mission was officially over. The tactical evasion was completely finished. Hudson was going to drop into the center of the room. He was going to bring the full devastating force of the United States Navy SEALs directly down onto their heads. He tapped the metal grate twice. It was time to go to war. Hudson kicked the heavy metal grate with both of his tactical boots. The thick steel screws tore violently free from the reinforced ceiling. The heavy panel fell like a solid iron block into the brightly lit luxury cabin. Hudson dropped immediately behind it. He landed squarely on top of the large central dining table. Expensive crystal glasses, silver plates, and champagne bottles shattered completely under his heavy weight. He did not pause to admire his dramatic entrance. His combat instincts took over instantly. Gage stood near the front exit. The massive mercenary raised his heavy light machine gun. He roared in sudden anger. He squeezed the heavy trigger to unleash a storm of bullets. He was a fraction of a second too slow. Hudson launched himself aggressively off the ruined table. He threw his captured combat knife like a lethal steel dart. The heavy blade spun rapidly through the bright air and buried itself deeply into Gage's right shoulder. The massive mercenary dropped his heavy weapon with a loud, wet grunt of pain. Hudson closed the remaining distance in a blur of motion. He grabbed the back of Gage's heavy tactical helmet. He drove the giant man's face brutally into the solid metal doorframe. The sickening crunch of breaking bone echoed clearly. Gage collapsed to the floor like a puppet with cut strings. Kyle reacted with the lethal speed of a seasoned professional killer. He drew a heavy black pistol from his tactical hip holster and fired 3 rapid shots directly at Hudson. Hudson dove sideways behind a thick leather passenger seat. The heavy caliber bullets tore through the expensive upholstery, sending white foam and shredded leather flying violently into the air. The terrified passengers screamed loudly and flattened their bodies completely against the floorboards. "Kill him right now!" Sterling screamed in pure, unadulterated panic. The billionaire realized his perfect, staged escape plan was falling apart completely. He grabbed his heavy silver briefcase tightly against his chest. He turned around and ran frantically toward the rear exit doors. He desperately wanted to escape the deadly crossfire. The rear sliding doors suddenly burst open with immense force. Rex entered the VIP cabin. The large German shepherd looked absolutely terrifying. His thick dark fur was matted heavily with fresh blood from his injured leg. He bared his sharp white teeth and let out a deep, vibrating growl that physically shook the enclosed cabin. He did not look like a calm service animal anymore. He looked like an apex predator ready to tear flesh. Sterling froze completely in his tracks. He stared wildly at the massive dog blocking his only path to safety. Rex stepped forward slowly, completely ignoring the sharp pain in his bleeding wound. He lowered his large head and locked his dark, intelligent eyes entirely on the billionaire. Sterling took a terrified, shaky step backward. His expensive leather shoes slipped on the scattered glass. He dropped his silver briefcase heavily onto the carpet. His legs simply refused to support his weight anymore. The arrogant businessman collapsed onto his knees. He trembled violently and whimpered loudly in absolute fear. Rex stood directly over him, effectively trapping him in place. The center of the ruined cabin belonged entirely to Hudson and Cale. Cale moved systematically around the damaged leather seats. He searched actively for a clear angle to shoot the Navy SEAL. Hudson knew he could not stay hidden defensively. He grabbed a heavy metal serving tray from the debris on the floor. He threw it hard toward the left aisle as a loud acoustic distraction. Kyle turned his body and fired 2 quick shots at the metallic noise. Hudson lunged aggressively from the right side. He tackled Kyle violently around the waist. The 2 highly trained men crashed heavily onto the floor. Kyle's pistol slid far away across the carpet. The fight immediately turned into brutal close-quarters hand-to-hand combat. They were evenly matched in physical size and lethal training. Kyle drove a hard, bony elbow directly into Hudson's ribs. Hudson ignored the sharp, radiating pain and delivered a devastating right hook straight to Kyle's jaw. The mercenary leader spit a mouthful of blood and countered instantly with a vicious knee strike to Hudson's stomach. They rolled aggressively across the floor, smashing heavily into seats and breaking the remaining wooden furniture. Kyle managed to reach down and draw a small, curved tactical knife from his ankle boot. He slashed wildly at Hudson's face in a desperate attempt to blind him. Hudson leaned his head backward just in time. The sharp steel blade sliced a thin, painful line across his cheek. Warm blood dripped down his jawline. Hudson grabbed Cale's knife hand tightly with both of his calloused hands. He applied immense, bone-crushing pressure, trying to force the mercenary to drop the deadly weapon. Kyle smiled a cold, bloody, arrogant smile. "You cannot save these people." Kyle hissed angrily through his red teeth. "You are just a dead man riding on a moving train." Hudson did not reply to the taunt. He focused entirely on the desperate physical struggle. Kyle was incredibly strong. The mercenary slowly pushed the sharp tip of the knife closer to Hudson's exposed throat. Hudson's arms shook with the extreme muscular effort. He needed a massive tactical advantage immediately. He needed the surrounding environment to help him win. The high-speed Apex Continental suddenly entered a sharp mountain curve on the tracks. The advanced train was engineered to tilt automatically and heavily into turns to safely maintain its extreme speeds. The entire cabin banked violently to the left. The sudden, drastic shift in gravity threw everything completely off balance. Loose luggage, broken glass, empty brass shell casings, and heavy pieces of debris slid wildly across the floorboards. Kyle lost his solid physical footing for exactly 1 critical second. He shifted his body weight instinctively to avoid falling sideways. It was a fatal, irreversible mistake. Hudson used the train's massive momentum perfectly. He pulled Cale's trapped arm violently forward while simultaneously sweeping his heavy boot against the mercenary's legs. Kyle lost his balance entirely. Hudson twisted his powerful torso and flipped Kyle violently over his shoulder. The mercenary leader flew heavily through the air and crashed brutally against the large, reinforced glass window on the left side of the cabin. The thick safety glass had already sustained heavy structural damage from the earlier gunfire. It simply could not withstand the massive impact of Cale's armored body. The window shattered completely outward into the dark night. A terrifying, deafening roar of freezing wind rushed instantly into the cabin. The sudden violent depressurization sucked loose debris, paper and glass directly out into the black void. Kyle lay stunned and bleeding heavily on the floor directly next to the shattered window frame. He was completely disoriented. He tried weakly to reach for his dropped pistol lying a few feet away. Hudson did not give him the chance to recover. The SEAL stepped forward purposefully and delivered a devastating, calculated kick directly to Cale's chest. The heavy combat boot knocked the remaining air completely out of Cale's lungs. The ruthless mercenary leader fell flat on his back, his eyes rolled up, and he did not move again. He was permanently defeated. The freezing wind whipped violently through the broken window, chilling the air instantly. Hudson stood tall over the unconscious mercenary. He took a deep, heavy breath to steady his racing heart. He looked across the completely ruined luxury cabin. Gage was completely unconscious by the front door. Cale was neutralized on the floor. The remaining terrified passengers were entirely safe. Hudson walked slowly and deliberately toward the rear of the cabin. Rex remained standing firmly over Sterling. The billionaire was still crying uncontrollably on the floor, completely broken by pure, undiluted fear. Hudson bent down gracefully and picked up the heavy silver briefcase containing the classified military hard drive. He looked down at the pathetic, wealthy businessman who had started this entire nightmare. "The theatrical show is officially over," Hudson said coldly. He reached down and patted Rex gently on the strong head. The brave German shepherd wagged his thick tail exactly once. They had survived the impossible odds. They had held the defensive line perfectly. The high-speed train continued to race forward through the dark night, but the terrifying nightmare inside the cars was finally over completely. Hudson did not relax his guard. The adrenaline still pumped fiercely through his veins. He grabbed thick plastic zip ties from Cale's heavy tactical vest. He bound Cale's wrists tightly behind his back, ensuring the plastic cut deeply into the mercenary's skin. He walked over to Gage. The giant man was still unconscious and bleeding from the knife wound. Hudson secured Gage in the exact same brutal manner. The luxury cabin remained eerily silent. The only sound was the howling winter wind rushing violently through the shattered glass window. Hudson approached Sterling. The billionaire sat awkwardly on the floor. Sterling stared blankly at the completely ruined cabin. The reality of his complete failure finally broke his arrogant mind. Hudson grabbed Sterling roughly by his expensive silk collar and pulled him forcefully to his feet. He used another thick zip tie to bind Sterling's hands securely. Sterling did not fight back. He offered absolutely zero physical resistance. Hudson retrieved his black combat knife from the floor and wiped the wet blood on a ruined velvet seat cushion. He walked slowly back to Rex. The German shepherd sat patiently amidst the scattered debris. Hudson knelt on the broken glass and carefully checked the medical bandage on the dog's front leg. Dark red blood soaked completely through the white fabric, but the wound remained stable. Rex licked Hudson's rough hand. "Almost done," Hudson whispered softly. The high-speed train suddenly lurched forward. The deafening screech of the heavy metal brakes echoed loudly through the cars. The automated safety system finally engaged to slow the massive machine. Outside the broken window, the dark, terrifying night slowly turned into a pale gray morning. The train approached the central city terminal. The apex continental ground to a complete, shuddering halt inside the massive glass dome of the central station. Bright red and blue police lights illuminated the entire concrete platform. Dozens of marked police cruisers and heavy armored vehicles surrounded the steel tracks completely. Heavily armed SWAT officers stacked aggressively outside the train doors. They expected a bloody, chaotic hostage situation. They expected heavy automatic resistance. The main doors hissed open with a rush of pressurized air. Captain Harris entered the cabin first. Harris was a veteran police commander. He had short grey hair, sharp observing eyes, and wore a thick black bulletproof vest. He raised his tactical assault rifle and scanned the immediate room. He froze completely in his tracks. He saw the thoroughly shattered luxury cabin. He saw the two massive mercenaries tied up and unconscious on the carpet. He saw the terrified but completely unharmed passengers huddling together near the seats. Finally, he saw the tall, imposing man in the faded canvas jacket holding a heavy silver briefcase and standing next to a bleeding German shepherd. "Lower your weapons immediately," Hudson commanded in a loud, authoritative voice. "The hostile threats are permanently neutralized. The hostages are entirely safe." Harris slowly lowered his rifle barrel toward the floor. His tactical team filed quickly into the cabin and took physical control of the bound mercenaries. Harris stared at Hudson in absolute disbelief. "Who are you?" Harris asked sharply. "Navy SEAL," Hudson replied simply. He pointed his left thumb directly towards Sterling. "And you need to arrest that man right now." Sterling suddenly snapped out of his deep shock. His primal survival instinct kicked in hard. He realized he needed to maintain his fake victim story desperately. "Arrest him!" Sterling screamed frantically at Commander Harris. "He is one of the violent terrorists. He tried to kill me. I am an innocent victim here." Harris looked incredibly confused. He looked back and forth between the composed, bloodied soldier and the frantic, tied-up billionaire. Hudson did not argue with the lies. He simply stepped forward and placed the heavy silver briefcase flat onto a broken wooden table. He popped the dual metal locks and opened the lid wide. The black military hard drive rested safely inside the foam padding. "This train hijacking was completely staged," Hudson explained calmly to the police commander. "Sterling hired the mercenary strike team. He planned to fake his own death in a massive explosive fire. He planned to murder every single passenger in this car to cover his tracks. He wanted to sell classified Department of Defense drone schematics on the illegal black market. The stolen data is right here on this drive." Sterling turned completely pale. All the color drained instantly from his face. The billionaire opened his mouth to speak, but absolutely no words came out. The absolute proof rested right in front of the police. Harris looked at the military drive. He looked at Cale's heavy tactical gear. He then looked at Sterling with pure, unadulterated disgust. Harris snapped his fingers sharply. Two heavy SWAT officers grabbed Sterling aggressively by the upper arms. They slapped cold steel handcuffs tightly onto his wrists. They read him his legal rights loudly and dragged him roughly out the door. Sterling's massive real estate empire, his immense personal wealth, and his arrogant pride vanished completely in that single fleeting moment. He was going to spend the rest of his miserable life locked inside a federal prison. The bright morning sun broke beautifully through the high glass ceiling of the central terminal. Warm golden light flooded the concrete train platform. Uniformed paramedics arrived quickly and began checking the shaken passengers for injuries. Hudson slung his faded canvas jacket over his broad shoulder. He picked up Rex's heavy leather leash. He did not clip it to the metal collar. He simply held it loosely in his right hand. "Let us go home," Hudson said. Rex walked proudly beside him, completely ignoring the painful limp in his step. They walked slowly toward the front exit doors. The wealthy passengers gathered together near the exit. These were the exact same people who had sneered at Hudson hours ago. They had complained bitterly about Rex's smell. They had demanded the train security staff throw the soldier and his dog out into the freezing luggage car. Now, they understood the absolute truth. They understood that immense wealth and social status could not stop a flying bullet. They understood that the rough, quiet man and his loyal animal had willingly walked through pure hell to save their lives. The passengers did not speak a single word. Spoken words were entirely inadequate for this moment. Instead, they moved completely out of the way. They separated respectfully into two distinct lines and formed a wide, clear path for Hudson and Rex. As the Navy SEAL and the German Shepherd walked slowly down the aisle, the wealthy men and women bowed their heads in deep, silent respect. Some of them wept softly into their hands. The woman with the expensive diamond necklace placed her hand firmly over her heart. The young mother hugged her little son tightly and whispered a quiet prayer of profound gratitude. Hudson did not gloat. He did not ask for a single thank you from the crowd. He simply walked through the parted people with quiet, solid dignity. He stepped out of the ruined train and onto the sunlit concrete platform. The golden morning light washed warmly over the dry blood and dark dirt on his clothes. He walked directly past the flashing police lights and the frantic local news crews. He just wanted a hot cup of black coffee and a long, peaceful rest for his brave dog. They disappeared slowly into the busy morning city. They were a silent soldier and his faithful shadow, leaving behind a group of people who would absolutely never judge a book by its cover again. The story of Hudson and Rex teaches us a powerful lesson about true value and courage. As a narrator, I believe that real heroes do not wear expensive suits, demand VIP treatment, or look down on others. They are often the quiet ones sitting in the shadows, ready to sacrifice their own safety for the very people who misunderstood them. In the darkest moments of life, wealth and status mean absolutely nothing. What truly matters is the strength of your character, your willingness to protect the innocent, and the unbreakable loyalty between a person and their faithful animal companion. If this story touched your heart and reminded you not to judge a book by its cover, please share it with your friends and family. Leave a comment below to let us know your thoughts on Hudson and Rex, and please subscribe to our channel so you never miss another inspiring journey. May God bless you and your loved ones with peace, strength, and the same unwavering loyalty shown by Rex today. If you believe in the power of courage and love, please type Amen in the comments below.
Thank you so much for watching until the very end. Your incredible support means the world to us. Stay safe, stay kind, and we will see you in the next video.